The Phantom's Diary. It was an old, weathered leather journal tucked away in a dusty corner of the attic. I hadn't been looking for anything in particular, just cleaning out the house after we inherited it from my great-aunt. The attic was a maze of forgotten relics, antique furniture covered in sheets, stacks of yellowed letters, and trunks that hadn't been opened in decades. But the diary caught my eye immediately. It was wedged between two cracked wooden boxes, the leather cover cracked and stained, the edges of the pages curled with age. Something about it seemed out of place, like it didn't belong here. I wiped the dust off the cover and opened it. The first few pages were empty, but about halfway through the writing began. The handwriting was elegant but jagged, as if the person writing had been in a hurry, their hand trembling with urgency. The date at the top of the page was from 1927. "I can't bear the silence any longer," the first entry read. "The house groans at night, as if it's alive. And then there's the garden. God help me, the garden." I shivered, feeling a chill settle over me. The attic was warm, almost stifling, but reading those words made the air feel colder, heavier. I glanced around, suddenly feeling as if I wasn't alone up here. But the only sound was the creak of the old house settling, the faint rustle of the wind outside. I turned the page. "It's worse now," the next entry continued. "I can hear her every night." At first it was only whispers, barely audible, coming from the garden. But last night I saw her, standing by the fountain, her eyes hollow, her skin pale as moonlight. She beckoned to me, but I didn't go. I couldn't. Not again. The handwriting grew more frantic with each entry, the words almost impossible to read, as if the writer's mind had begun to unravel. They wrote about a woman, a phantom, who haunted the garden, appearing only at night. A woman who had once lived in the house but had died tragically, her body buried somewhere deep within the garden soil. But it wasn't just any death. The diary hinted at a secret, a terrible act that had bound the woman's spirit to the land. I could feel my heart racing as I read further, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The writer seemed obsessed, convinced that the phantom was trying to lure them into the garden, to join her. They wrote about waking up at night to find muddy footprints in their bedroom, the faint smell of damp earth lingering in the air. "I hear her now," the final entry read, the handwriting barely legible. "She calls to me. I can't resist any longer. I have to go. I have to know what she wants." The diary ended abruptly after that. No explanation, no conclusion, just silence. I closed the book, my hands trembling. The air in the attic felt stifling now, pressing in on me from all sides. I needed to get out of there. I shoved the diary into my bag and made my way downstairs, my heart still pounding in my chest. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had read. The idea of a phantom haunting the garden, of something so terrible that it had driven someone mad with fear, gnawed at me. I couldn't sleep, so I decided to go outside, to see the garden for myself. The garden had always been beautiful, even though it had fallen into disrepair. Overgrown vines tangled around the wrought iron fence, and the fountain at the center had long since dried up, its stone cracked and crumbling. But tonight, under the pale light of the moon, it looked different, more alive somehow. The wind whispered through the trees, and as I stepped closer to the fountain, I heard it. A voice, faint but unmistakable. A woman's voice, singing softly just beyond the hedges. I froze, every instinct in my body screaming at me to turn back, to run inside and lock the doors. But I couldn't. The voice pulled at me, drawing me closer, just like the diary had described. My feet moved on their own, carrying me toward the fountain. As I neared it, I saw something. Someone standing by the edge. A woman. Her back was to me, her long, dark hair flowing down her back like a shadow. She was dressed in white, the fabric of her gown billowing in the breeze, though there was no wind. My mouth went dry. This couldn't be real. It was impossible. I stepped forward, my heart thundering in my chest, and the woman turned. Her face was pale, almost translucent, her eyes dark and sunken, hollow like the diary had said. She stared at me unblinking, her mouth moving as if she were speaking, but no sound came out. I felt a sudden pressure in my chest, like I couldn't breathe, like the air itself had turned solid around me. And then she reached out. I stumbled back, my hand brushing against the fountain's edge. The stone was cold, too cold and slick with something wet. I glanced down and my stomach lurched. The fountain wasn't dry anymore. It was filled with water, dark and still, and floating just beneath the surface was the pale face of a woman. Another woman. I gasped, stepping back further, my mind spinning. There were two of them. Two women, identical, their dead eyes staring up at me from beneath the water. I ran. I don't know how I made it back inside, but I slammed the door behind me, my chest heaving, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I collapsed against the wall, my mind racing. I don't know what I saw out there. I don't know what the phantom wants or why she's haunting this house. But I do know one thing, the diary wasn't finished.